feel like I'm in a weird position. I'm not going to lie. I can't see myself, but I feel like I'm looking up. But I may be wrong. It's probably because I did GB News about protesting before. So I'm in like a weird position. So if I look different to usual, that's why. How are we all? How's it going, my lovelies? I'm just going to wait for a few more people to join and then I shall start. Anybody got any exciting news that they want to share? Just to say, whatever platform you're on, I always say the best one to join me on really, as far as asking questions, is Facebook, because it's just really easy and I get to see them in front of me, and then it's easier because people highlight the ones that are coming in. If you have asked a question, obviously start answering it, but if you haven't asked a question and you wish to, you can either do it on the feed on Facebook, or alternatively you can just message me on Facebook pages, and that way it'll be anonymous. So it's completely okay to ask anonymous questions per se. I have my Christmas decorations up. I don't think there are very many behind me. No. There's none behind me, retaining the set for my crime stuff. But to the left of me, and actually it's the left of me. I'm trying to now think that you're in my room and then it's on the right of you, but you're not, and you don't even know because you can't see it. But I've got Christmas decorations in a fire area, not in a fire that I'm setting on fire. Not pyromania, not just throwing them all out in some rebellious moment. And I have a big Christmas tree behind me, and I've done none of it because I'm not allowed near any decorations, because apparently I am like a 5-year-old with webbed hands when it comes down to my creative projects and prowess. So my other half has done it for me, which is yet another reason to remain not married when you have a list of balances, checks and balances. Should I stay married? Let's think about the things that he does for me. Gonna have to keep him because you'll never be able to decorate your house at Christmas. Really nice seeing you all. I think that this last few weeks has been quite challenging for a lot of people. I'm going to put it out there now. I know that there's a lot of civil unrest in Europe. I also understand why. And I also think that a lot of people are starting to feel afraid about what that means for us. So I'll just give you a little bit of positivity, which is that it's been shown research-wise, and the research has been very effectively done, that it takes 3.5% of a population to say no to something for it not to work. That's not bad, is it? 3.5% of people, it's 3.5, don't know who the half is, 3.5 people out of every 100 need to say no to something and it doesn't happen. So don't worry, is what I'm saying. In a democracy, things don't happen unless people all want it to happen, and even when a tiny proportion choose for it not to, in this case, let's say mandates for things that people might not feel okay about, it won't work. Just going to make you feel positive about that. Did I just get asked a question which is completely unrelated to mental health, which is what is my favourite tipple at Christmas, Emma? Anything alcoholic, if I'm completely honest. I don't really have very much choosiness around that kind of stuff. I'm not a big drinker, but at Christmas, obviously, there's a lot of preparation to do, and therefore I'll just drink anything that people put in my hands. Not good for a hangover though, I will state that. Ideally, stick to something individual. Avoid lots of wine and not too much vodka. But I will inevitably get a hangover at Christmas because inevitably I will mix my drinks, because I'll be so busy cooking and talking that when people hand me things, I'll just be like, yeah, I should probably drink this. Much like food, in fact, at Christmas. Much like food. Much like anything that people give me. I'm either opening them or I'm eating them. Sometimes I'm opening things, then eating them. So it can be all of these things in the same moment. Sometimes the opening things and eating them can go horribly wrong. Said, if I'm in a mind where I think I'm going to eat the thing, and it's soap. Which, you may giggle, that happened to me one year. I was handed, well, I don't have a sense of smell. So, little fact about me, don't have a sense of smell very often. Can be brought back with steroids, but don't have them because they're quite bad for you in the long term. So most of the time I just can't smell anything. So this year, I was given what I believed were little chunks of fudge. And they looked delicious. Little deliciousy lumps of fudge. So I took a handful and I put it in my mouth, and I got about 4 chews into it before I thought, it's weird fudge. And that was because it was soap. It was just soap. It was little chunks of... Who designs little chunks of soap? Who thinks of that? I mean... You use soap because you use it in your hand. You hold it, don't you? You're not like, just get one of those tiny little squares and just rub my face with it. So yeah, that was a bit of a disaster. But the moral of the story is, maybe think more clearly about the things that you just shove in your mouth. Hi Emma, from Johnny and Ben. Please can we say hello to you? Of course I can. Hello Johnny, hello Ben. Triple hello. And a little bit of life advice. Don't eat soap. I was going to say it. Thank me later. Thank me now, then thank me later. Just thank me. Pass it on. Pay it forward. Don't eat soap. Just tell your relatives. I'm telling you. Soap can be a dangerous thing. Oh, I've got another one. What are you doing? What are you saying? Hi, Emma. I lost one of my best friends by suicide in August. And since then, my head's been all over the place. At the moment, I'm really struggling to concentrate with uni work and my memory is shocking. But I'm fine to distract myself by going out with friends. I feel as if I'm an imposter almost for not being able to cope with uni, and I can't understand why I can't focus. I also haven't slept properly for months, even sleeping 5 to 6 hours. I feel like I haven't slept. I don't want to go down the medication route. Is this normal? Am I going mad? Am I an imposter? So there's different themes there. First of all, just to acknowledge the grief of suicide. When you have a friend die of suicide, it's a really challenging time because there are lots of reasons why it's challenging. 1, it's completely unexpected. 2, it sounds like that was a young death, which never makes sense. It wouldn't matter if your friend had got knocked down by a bus or just dropped down dead. The point is, when there is a death of a young person, it feels wholly outside the realms of ration and reality, and it's not what you expect, and it's certainly not what you're prepared for. So you're in that shock phase. On top of that, often you start thinking, wow, life's vulnerable. Now, when you get to my age, you've kind of gone through the motions of dealing with people dying, dealing with animals dying, losing people that have great meaning to you, and you have to do some work on your own mortality. So I've worked to a point where I'm really cool with death. You know, I get a lot of shit on social media for saying things like that, but totally at peace with it. It's like part of the process, it's part of the cycle, it's really important. I don't want to be here forever. The idea of being downloaded to a computer and having eternity is something that would literally make me go insane, because I think that there is a real natural process to life and death, and I think it's a beautiful process even though it's painful. So to some degree, as you get older, you kind of have those thoughts. But when I was younger, and a really close friend of mine, Danny, killed himself, he was 19, the truth was that it was just a blindsiding moment because I didn't even think about death. And then another friend of mine drowned, and I can still remember when I was told that he drowned saying, is he okay? Because I couldn't understand what drowning was in my head. It didn't relate to death. It was like, well, is he okay? So the reality of that is that you're not prepared as a young person for those feelings. It's just not something that you expect, and particularly not what you expect with a peer. So you've got this whole new experience of, hang on, life is something that's vulnerable and it's fragile, and also to some degree in the experience of the world and existence, it's just a fleeting moment, isn't it? Every single one of our lifetimes, we're all going to be memories, and then in the end we won't even be memories, we'll just be names on a family tree somewhere or in a record, and that's okay. That's the nature of our experience. But that can be massive to deal with, and everyone gets hit by it at different stages in their life. So number one, that could be a big part of it, that you're just like blindsided by this new reality and you're starting to think about your own mortality, and that is scary and challenging, and it's opening, and it makes you concerned about all the possibilities, and it makes you feel a little more seriously about the way the world is and the way that you are within that world. And then you've got university. Now, on one level, university can be the best fun in the world. On another level, it can be incredibly boring when it comes down to certain elements of work, and then it can also be really pressurized. So you get this kind of triple experience of possibilities and potentials, some good, some bad. So it's not that you're an imposter because you don't necessarily feel that turned on by the work you're doing. It can just be that you're not necessarily passionate and motivated by the context that you're working in. The content might not be something that makes you feel inspired. That's okay. Doesn't make you an imposter. I hate doing boring stuff. If you hand me something that I've got to learn and I really don't like it, then I'm going to resentfully do it, but it won't be anywhere near as effortless as it would be if I was actually engaged in it, if I was joyfully engaged with that work. So it might be the content that you're doing that isn't really inspiring you. You shouldn't beat yourself up about that. It's a great life lesson. It's like, well, this is what it feels like to be demotivated. I definitely don't want to spend my life doing just this. And so you take that as a lesson, but then you have to commit to what you need to do to get through it, right? That's the big question that you have to ask yourself. Okay, I'm not feeling as connected to this as I think my peers are, and that's okay. We can give ourselves time off for that. That's fine. Lots of things in life you won't feel inspired or connected to, and You might fall out of love with things that you once felt connected to, and again, that's okay. But you kind of have to say, what do I need to do to just get through? That's a really good way of exploring it. And then it comes down to, well, okay, my sleep routine's really screwed, but equally you're going out all the time. Well, it's going to be screwed, isn't it? Because if you're going to stay out late and then get up late, then your whole biological rhythm is going to be a bit screwed, and it means that you're not getting good quality sleep, and it probably means you're aiding and abetting sleep sometimes with things like alcohol. So there are things that you can have power over there. That might come down to saying, look, I love university, I love going out and partying, but I'm just going to have 3 nights a week where I do that. And then the rest of the time, I'm going to go to bed earlier and wake up earlier. I'm going to create a schedule of work, and I'm going to sit my ass down, and I am going to make myself do it, even though I don't necessarily feel like this is a good fit. Because an imposter can be seen as something really negative, can't it? So we call it imposter syndrome, for example. But what if an imposter isn't an imposter at all? What if an imposter is somebody who is talented and gifted enough to be chameleon-like in their capacities to do the certain things that they do? So they end up in certain places. But then, in spite of the fact that they can end up there and they've got the skills and talents to acquire that skill, it turns out they're really not that turned on or interested by it. Well, that's not an imposter. That's somebody who tries something and realises it's not kind of really for them, and maybe sticks at it because they're doing that and they need to get it sorted and filed and finished. But that's not an imposter. It's just somebody who's realised that that isn't something that feels like a great fit. So you don't feel like you're quite as connected and committed and passionate and as engaged as your peers, but it certainly doesn't make you an imposter. And in fact, that's like every single one of us to some degree when we get to a certain situation where we don't feel that enthralled by it, or a job that we no longer really wish to do, or a passion and a hobby that we used to feel inspired us so brilliantly and yet now seems not to. These are all normal things. So you're not an imposter is what I'd say. It's a very long way of saying it, but just to fill it out a little bit as to why I don't think you're an imposter. But then the other thing that you need to explore is, okay, if the suicide is constantly making you feel that you're not moving forward, then it might be really good to go and get yourself some therapy. And the great thing about universities is the majority of them have a really excellent student services that have counsellors available. I did my placements when I was training in my 3 years at Manchester University when I did the ADDIP in counselling. That was very much a place where students would be sent and you would get opportunities to work with them, and it was brilliant, and some of it was really long term. So explore maybe getting some help in that respect as well. The big thing to remember is you are young. Life doesn't make sense to a lot of us at most ages, but when you're young, it's kind of a place of enthralling change and growth, and also a shedding of a skin and a reality of what life can feel like and be like when you start growing up. And that's not to patronise you at all. It's just that I talk about life being a journey of suffering, a journey of loss, but one that you have to undertake to do it joyfully. But you don't get that until you probably get to university ages. It suddenly starts getting real, and you're like, wow, there's a journey to go on. It's a long journey, hopefully, and it's got so many considerations and so many vulnerabilities and so many conflicts and so many losses, and there are all these things, and there's nothing you can do to actually avoid that if you want to live, right? And that can be really hard to just suddenly wake up to. And if you don't wake up to it in a way where you can kind of go, oh yeah, but that's okay because I'm going to figure it out as I go along, and I'm going to make peace with it, and it's going to be great, and there's going to be adventures. If you don't see all those positives, it can feel overwhelmingly anxiety provoking. So you have to be very careful when you start analysing things that way and think about all the great things that that adventure is going to involve, in spite of all the losses, in spite of the pain, in spite of the responsibility, in spite of all those things. And that would be the final thing about being a student at university. You're walking into the world of responsibility, but you're not quite immersed in it, right? You're not quite there yet. So you still have time to ponder and think about all these other opportunities and all these other courses in your mind of what you could do and where you could go. And that's a really good place to be. But sometimes the not having every second full of this responsibility that we end up carrying, because that's what happens as adults and certainly as elder adults, you kind of have these pockets of moments where you're like, wow, everything feels so unsure and uncertain, and I feel overwhelmed by the possibilities. And again, try to turn that to a place of positivity. It's like, good, be overwhelmed by all the possibilities, because that's a great place. You've not yet formed. You don't yet know what your majority of your experience will be like. And that's brilliant, because this is the time to really experiment, really enjoy yourself, try new things. Don't get bogged down in all the lies that you're told about what your life is meant to be, and just do what's right for you. Unapologetically, unashamedly, just do that. is what I'd say. I went on a little bit there, but I feel that there are lessons within that that maybe we can all relate to. Do you know how someone can overcome depersonalization and derealization? So, for those of you who don't know what depersonalization and derealization is, it's a physical experience that comes from an emotional place, usually which has a high level of anxiety that's related to it, or I'd probably say always a level of state of high anxiety. Also, it can be very much connected to dissociative disorder. So dissociative disorder can be something that people experience because they've had incredible trauma, and there is a protective mechanism essentially where the brain and the body almost splits. I might not be describing this completely accurately because obviously I'm only telling you about the experiences that I've had working with people, and certainly there'll be reams of information that you look up online. But the way that I've always explored it with clients who experience this kind of level is that if you've been in a horrified, traumatized state, particularly as a child, and you don't feel as a child that you have any power, there's a helplessness, of course there is, and then your brain has to like figure out, well, okay, how do I deal with this overwhelming dread, fear, panic, these sensations of hopelessness and helplessness, and still survive? Then some process occurs where the brain decides, well, okay, you won't really be present in this moment to some degree. So it's like a part of who you are just gets taken somewhere, I suppose one level you could say safe, protective, or disassociates to cope with that situation that's at hand. But depersonalization and derealization can be a part of that, but they can also be completely separate to things like dissociative. So depersonalization and derealization can actually be like a physical experience. And to describe it, one of the things that your brain has to do in moments of fight, flight, freeze is, if you think about us, a million years ago, think about us even 500 years ago, there's probably much more likelihood of you getting seriously injured in battles and tribal behavior, meaning that you have to be ready to fight, flight, freeze. These are things that we could all identify with. Well, we still have developed very, very quickly since then. If you think about the last 100 years of development, humanity has just shifted gears ridiculously. So that whole brain experience of fight, flight, freeze, and your body going into states of high anxiety is still dealing with the way the world would have been like 600 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago. But in the past 100 years, we've got all this crazy stuff like technology. Like, think about social media. We don't even know what social media is doing to us. We have so limited knowledge of it. I mean, they can bring out research papers every day of the week. You haven't got any long-term data. You're talking 20 years. And you're talking probably less than that people have actually started to really begin to research that. And we don't know how that's going to affect us in 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, 2,000 years. We don't know. So that's something that's going to evolve as we evolve. And imagine how quickly that's happened. That's been an unbelievable leap. In fact, if you think about humans up until we kind of had the accidental fortune of wolves becoming tame and dogs becoming dogs as opposed to wolves, and man, because we like and are agreeable with animals a lot of the time when we're not eating them, bringing the dogs into the fold, and then the dogs eating all the meat that was going off, and so disease massively went down and fire happened around the same time. So we had this massive collusion of men and women and children going from being like foragers and getting eaten occasionally to being head of the food chain, right? This has been really quick compared to all other experiences. And the reason I'm saying that is because you've still got this part of your brain, probably the majority of it, that is acting evolutionarily like it did many, many years ago, but with this whole new set of circumstances around it. So depersonalization, derealization is potentially and mainly due to this experience where once upon a time, if I felt really scared or afraid or traumatized, or I was in threat, then my body needs to prepare me for battle, and it needs to make sure that if something horrible happens, for example, if I lose a limb, that the blood will be clotted, it will be switched off. It sends cortisol and adrenaline to your extremities. And that means that if you do lose a leg in battle, or an arm in battle, then you're gonna survive, right? That's a survival mechanism. And that's why when people get knocked down by trains and they lose both their legs, which you would imagine would make you bleed out and die, that doesn't happen. Whereas if you get knifed in the stomach, often that does. It's a different response. A slow leaking wound is more dangerous than that instant kind of impact because of all the adrenaline and cortisol. And with depersonalization and derealization, the belief is that that makes your brain just kind of flood the extremities that way, and you almost feel like you don't belong to your body. You just do not belong to it at all. So it feels like you are literally in a different space. It's a completely different stratosphere to your physical being. And what we know about that is if we recognize that this is a very high anxiety response, then we need to reduce the anxiety. So yes, of course, I've known people who've managed to deal with depersonalization and derealization because they practice things like very clear deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, things like the box breath is really effective. They constantly do things like meditative experiences and practice. Some will engage in trauma therapies as well, because often it can be very trauma linked, particularly if it's to do with DID as well. So you might look at things like schema therapy or EMDR. These are all opportunities that can help you move through these feelings. But the big one is to kind of identify, okay, what is my body responding to this way? What is it doing? Because whilst it feels like your body is aggressing you and that you're being put in this really scary kind of completely separate space where you can't quite connect your body with your brain and emotions, it's a protective mechanism. And often our pathologies and our neuroses that we find so disgusting to deal with because they're just horrendously challenging for us, they're often incredibly effective survival mechanisms when you think about them. They're protecting you. It's really frustrating, but I think sometimes we try to reject that part of ourselves that we don't feel is doing what it needs to do because, it makes it more difficult for us to go out and fit into society how we wish to. It makes us less ready to go and socialize and all these things that you can kind of go, yeah, makes perfect sense that it's frustrating. But we almost need to kind of go, okay, but why did you happen? What are you here to tell me? What did I need to be informed about? What do I need to learn so that I can make peace with this part of myself? And that's one of the reasons why I think therapy can be really, really helpful. And if you do suffer from depersonalization and derealization, or you've never heard of it and now you're thinking, oh, bloody hell, that's what I go through, then you should definitely speak to a GP and get a referral for some kind of therapy, purely because usually there's a big conversation to have about what it's manifesting, why it's here, why it's present, and what you can do to firstly get to know it, secondly to process it, and of course finally to diffuse it. But for the most part, it's remembering this is a physical reaction to a state of fear. And actually, if that's a physical reaction to a state of fear, then I can meet it with physical reactions to a state of calm. So I can create the calm, soothe it, hot baths, meditative music, really relaxing, taking yoga, doing all those things that people tell you to do, but very often people don't do. They're told to do those things because they're really effective. If you can do one thing, I keep saying this, just walk. Just go out every day for an hour and a half and walk. Just get as much white light on your skin. Just walk. Just get out there, do it. That in itself will reduce cortisol behaviors. So honestly, that would be helpful as well. Hi Emma, can you tell me if you would recommend, Hi Emma, please can you tell me if you would recommend clinical partners for a full mental health assessment? Thank you, blessed be. Right, I'll have to look up clinical partners with respect because I won't be able to tell you that until later. So if you make sure that you inbox me, I'll have a look and I'll ask around as well. But I would imagine if it's coming up high in Google, it's because they pay quite a lot of money to get their searches up. And if they get quite a lot of money to get their searches up, then the chances are they're quite successful. I know that's a really rudimentary way of approaching it, but having worked in tech for about 7 years, I can tell you that if they can afford to come up quickly in the searches, it's usually that they're making quite a bit of money. And whilst on one level we can be like, oh, well, money doesn't mean anything. On another, when it comes down to service, often you have to do quite a good service to get good rankings, and you have to be able to pay a lot to get those good rankings as well, meaning that you need to do a good service. So that's my first instinct, but I'll ask around for you and see in any of my psychology and therapy groups whether anybody knows them, okay? Hi Emma, who was your teenage idol? Mine was and still is Jason Donovan. It was John Bon Jovi and Wayne Hussey from The Mission. Both of those really. They were the two. I kind of had really, and actually if I'm really honest, Morrissey as well. See, the minute that you do that, and then it's Johnny Depp, Johnny Depp. Oh, well, Johnny Depp was quite cool. Johnny Marr, I should say. So there's quite a lot, and very little that I can do to not just go down a massive stream. My brain's like that with art and everything. It's like when somebody asks me one thing, I can't do it, because I wake up every day and just have different thought processes, and I was the same as a teenager. So like, I'd love AC/DC one day and Iron Maiden the next day, and then I'd like Sisters of Mercy the third day, and then I'd be dead upset because I'd feel like I was disrespecting like the other bands that I felt I needed to like. I know it sounds ridiculous. I love The Cure. So any of those and all of those. Jason Donovan, I do remember that. I remember him being in the charts with Kylie Minogue singing Especially For You, was it? Mm-hmm. And then I remember at the same time Angry Anderson was in the charts, and that's kind of a reflection of my musical taste, that polarity is, that's how my world works. But yeah, so there you go. Bit of a question answered for you then. So can't commit. Same with food. Like, what's your favourite food? Everything that I can eat that hasn't been alive. I do love toast. I do say, that's with respect, Pete's right. When people ask me what I'd take to a desert island, it's bread. Because I just think it's very diverse. And I imagine there'd be fruit, and I could end up making some like bread puddings and sandwiches, roll it into a ball. You know what I mean? I can do all those things with bread. Just bread's a great thing. By the way, Pete would take potatoes, and I'm not jealous. It's as simple as that. I am studying my LLB, and my head feels like it's going to explode. I feel I'm not good enough to complete the course, but always get good grades. How do I overcome this? Well, number one, that course is hard, right? You should be finding it quite demanding. It's a really hard course. You've chosen a really difficult one. But the fact that you're doing well and you're getting the decent grades means that your self-esteem and the security around this is the problem, not you. Now, on one level, I always want to say that there's also a real positive to having humility. Like, I think everyone should sing their own praises. Don't get me wrong. Please accept that I think that everyone should sing their own praises. I think that if you're great at something, you should be like, I am great at that. It's like, I'll always say I'm great at communication. That's the only thing I'll say. And I usually say that I'm quite good at baking as well, but not to the stage of being able to go on a TV show and compete in anything, because it just looks a bit shit. But it tastes really good, which is all that matters. But genuinely, I think when it comes down to being truly good people, a lot of us do have that humility, and it makes us a really lovely human. You know, we don't take things for granted. We work hard, and we're surprised when we do fantastic, even though people around us can be like, well, you worked hard, you deserved it. But the humility within us means that we drive ourselves harder. So we're like, well, I did well this time, but what if I don't do well next time? And that's why you revise hard, and that's why you work at it. And that sounds like what you're doing. So your head feels like it's exploding because you are committed to this. You are driving that car. You've got agency. You're learning, growing, developing, but it's not easy. And you're going to question yourself, because if you don't question yourself, how will you learn? And if you don't take things seriously, well, how are you going to succeed? Sometimes we act as if people who know that they've done the work are going to go into the exam and know that they've aced the exam. It's just not true. The majority of diligent, discerning young people and adults, they do their work. They go into the exams, they do the exam, they come out and they go, I hope I passed, you know, hopefully it was okay. And they're made up when they do really well, and when they do average, they're accepting. And obviously if they don't do well, then that's again a lesson for learning and for moving forward and for working harder. But right now it feels like you've got a slight mismatch, which is that you're not allowing yourself to enjoy the results. So like, I would say the mindset you've got right now when it comes down to your course is to some degree effective. You're doing well, but you're not allowing yourself the celebrations. So it's okay to have that insecurity before you do an exam. It's okay to have some insecurity afterwards. But when you get the result, it's about saying, you know, yeah, look, that makes sense. I worked hard. I read the questions correctly. I made sure that I answered succinctly. And the consequence is I've done well. And I'm going to be okay for this moment to just say, and that's because I'm a contender. That's because I'm in the right place. Now, the LLB is one of those things that I think is a front-end experience, because you have to make decisions about what you want for your career. is this the way that you want to go? Because equally, it might be that actually you don't want to practice the area that you're practicing. You know, you might not be wanting to go down that route. You may realise that it's not just for you at this moment in time, and that these lessons are really helpful in teaching you what you might want to do with that instead. Do you want to practice or do you not? And again, that's important information to take in. Or it might be that you can't imagine anything better than practicing. However, you're worried about the fact that you've got to get through these exams first. And obviously they're not the only exams. There's further exams after you actually get your degree. But this is all stuff that you can work on as you move through it. As for the head exploding stuff, well, again, when things really matter to you, you always are going to take it seriously, and your head is going to spiral a little bit. But what you've got to do is not catastrophize. You've got to deal with what the evidence is. So if the evidence is always that you do well, then that's your evidence. You know, you can't go back and change it because it's there. So like your evidence is saying you are not just a contender, you are good at what you're doing. You're learning, you're developing, you're delivering. And it's a hard course. So with respect, you're doing it effectively. And that's why a lot of other people go and do things like an English degree before they then convert afterwards, because of the fact that some people find it easy to do it that way because they know how challenging the LLB is going to be. So just be aware that you have put yourself in a challenging place and you're nailing it. And try to just give yourself that sense of, well, this is because it matters to me. And instead of going, well, that means there's something fundamentally wrong with me because I actually struggle with the way I feel because I want this to work out. That means that you are, like I said, a contender. You are studious. You are caring. You're taking responsibility and accountability for those feelings. And that is a good thing. And that's what everybody wants in somebody who practices in the end. Somebody who could fight the corner really, really effectively. So that's a good quality. But you need to work on your confidence. And again, if you want to work on your confidence, you don't always need to be confident just in the area of career choice that you're going down. You could equally go and be confident by saying to yourself, I'm going to challenge myself. I'm going to go and do some things that really make me scared. And I'm just going to nail them. And I'm going to put myself in positions where I'm really afraid, because the minute I overcome it, I'm growing in that courage, and that courage grows confidence. So you kind of can grow in confidence elsewhere, and it will distill to all these other areas and arenas. So think about those kind of challenges. I'm going to do what I tried to do before my world went into chaos and set myself my 12 months of bucket list from January. We managed to do like one, and then the world went mad. And basically doing that, it's all about challenging yourself to do something scary. We managed to climb Snowdon in trainers. Who knew? Who knew? I didn't know what a crampon was. What is that? Who needs one? I did think it was weird that people had sticks and strange things on their shoes, but we had trainers and light apparels and just one drink. But we still managed it. There was snow. There was a lot of snow. That's another thing. Realistically, it was probably not sensible, and at times maybe mountain rescue might have needed to be called, but we managed it. That's the point. And every single month I'm setting myself something next year. So do that. Try to think about some real big challenges for you. And at university, it's a great place to do that. It might be joining groups. It might be doing charity things. Just put yourself in positions that you wouldn't ordinarily put yourself in, and see how that grows and blends that confidence within your work that you're doing now. Similar. Hello, Emma. Glad to see you back on here. You can't get rid of me, Aidan. Nice to see you. Could I have a shout out, please? You can. There's a bit of me that just wants to shout Aidan really loudly, but hi, Aidan Evans. It's that mischievous part of my brain. Sorry, I always asked, but it makes my day. Well, you're welcome to that. You've had a rubbish day, not got a lot of sleep. I feel like work is getting on top of me, and I'm worried I won't do well in my BSc psychology degree. To have worries like that is fully normal. It's more about, okay, well, what are you going to do with that worry? And why is that worry occurring? Because if the worry is occurring because you're just having that moment of, do I deserve to be here? Everyone else seems so bright. I remember being like that. I was like, she does her hair really well. She's definitely going to be brighter than me. He's wearing a black shirt, even though I look like a 1960s hippie. He's totally a contender here. Why is that guy sat next to me 53? Because obviously in psychology, there's quite a lot of, mature students. Now, I'd be that student, you know what I mean, nearabouts. But the point is, when you are learning and growing and developing, you have these moments of questioning. Imagine what it'd be like if you didn't. Imagine how awful young people would be if they were like, yeah, I'm great at everything. I don't have to learn anything. 1, you'd be vacuous. 2, arrogant. 3, highly dislikable. 4, incorrect. And most importantly, damaging if you were doing a degree like psychology. In fact, the very essence of psychological inquiry and critical analysis is that we do a lot on ourselves. We acknowledge that there is very little that we know and a great deal that we need to know about. And that's the place that we begin. The benchmark, I think, of a healthy human is one who realizes that they are going to know sweet FA compared to the amount there is to know in the world. So even with psychology, you're only ever going to know a pinhead of possibility in that paradigm because it's massive. It's why people do doctorates and write 90,000 words on something this tiny, because you have to choose a tiny element. And they're people who are doing like PhDs and inquiring massively into that and taking 5 to 6 years of their lives at times to do it. So you have to acknowledge that you're never ever going to know a lot. And that's why it's really important to be humble within that line of inquiry. And so your mindset of, oh, should I be here? Do I deserve it? That's not a bad place to be. You do deserve it and you should be there. And we need people who are compassionate, sensitive, and actually think about humility positively and how they can use that to grow and develop and learn. So that's a good thing. Secondly, when you kind of go, why am I here? Question is this, like, why are you not there? It's as simple as that. Why aren't you there? You're there because of the fact that you've qualified to a point where you've achieved, you've got accepted into university, you've been taken on the course, and that's a really hard thing to do. When I went to do psychology degrees, the grades were nowhere near. They were like 3 Cs because nobody wanted to do psychology. Like, it wasn't even considered really scientific back in the day. I mean, they fought for scientific analysis and acceptance. They really did. But now it's 3 A's or 2 A's and a B if you're lucky. So the fact that you're on a course doing it, you're not just bright, you're far brighter than I was when I was at that age. So kind of know that. And this degree is a ticket. That's all it is, it's a ticket. And as long as you learn the information and then repeat the information, you'll be fine. And then when it comes down to, I suppose, the hardest bit of a psychology degree, in my opinion, I did not like cognitive. I did not like applied. Statistics were not a thing of great joy to me, although I did a very complex one in my dissertation. For my dissertation, I used very, very complex statistics. But these are things that are hard to do. But that's why you've got your tutors. So the thing about students is often you don't use the people who are there to teach you. You go to your lectures, you hand in your assignments, you get your marks. But how often do you go knock on a door of a lecturer and say, I need to know about this? That's the great thing about university. These people, these professors and doctors, these individuals who are there to teach you, even the assistants who are kind of going through the motions themselves of doing PhDs and learning and growing, they are like fountains of knowledge. This is what they do. And the irony is that the teachers of psychology, even though obviously practicing psychologists go out and work often with clients or go into research and all of these things, often the teachers are really at the forefront of continued learning. So they are a great place to begin. They often have lots of knowledge about things that I wouldn't know, because I don't need to know the breadth and spectrum of all those developed areas because I'm not teaching this particular subject. So go and make use of those. But also know that good people often feel that they are imposters. And also remember that an imposter syndrome only exists in people who are talented and gifted, that they can go do the work and find it relatively easy. And then they think that they must be doing something wrong because everybody else looks like they're struggling. I mean, that's the art of finding your fit. When you're actually great at something to the point where you don't have to make as much effort as other people, and you still succeed. So kind of bring it down to, what do you need to know? Well, you need to know that you need to work hard, you need to be steadfast, it will be struggle sometimes, you've got people on hand to teach you and to actually help you analyse those fears and feelings and educate you. They want you to pass, and most importantly, you've got your A-levels. And if there's one thing I know about A-levels versus degree, is degree's easier. And I think that's a fact universally acknowledged by so many. If you've got through 3 A-levels in 2 years and got high scores like A's and B's, you are undoubtedly going to be able to do your degree, without a doubt. And remember, as you go through your degree, you will refine the elements that you do, because that's what happens after the first year and second year, you refine it. So don't worry too much. Hi Emma, I'm off to a mental health rehab place in under a fortnight. I've put my master's on hold, and colleagues have all been supportive work-wise. I've always been fortunate enough to have a career I wanted and amazing friends, family and grandchildren, but I'm terrified of going and worry that I'll just transfer one form of self-harm to another form. How can I get past EUP, anxiety, eating disorders, etc.? I think the fact that you go into a mental health rehab is awesome. I think it's great that you put your masters on hold because you can come back to it, and mental health and physical experiential health is important above anything else. So the experiences that you have mentally and physically are the most important thing to deal with, and you've got an opportunity to go to a rehab unit where they're going to really look after you and protect you and help you to kind of really get to grips with all of these things is really important. Also, look, one of the things that I've come to realize over the years is that people have all these classifications, and I kind of think to myself, like, what you really could do with is a complete revisit. Because as you go through your life, people will be like, you're suffering from anxiety. A year later, you're suffering from depression. It might be a new person who sees you. You're suffering from EUPD or BPD. Now, I'm not certainly qualified enough to tell you whether they are right or wrong. I would not pretend for a minute I am. I am telling you, though, that I think when lots of people have looked into your life and your psychology, and you've been given different titles, then for some reason they get stuck. And it's like, just because somebody tells you suffer from migraine when you're 20 doesn't mean that you have to suffer from migraine when you're 40. And I know that you might think that's trite using a physical issue such as migraine, but I'm exampling it because if somebody said, well, I suffer from migraine, and then that's it, that's what they've decided they'll suffer from the rest of their life, but then they don't necessarily have somebody look at that 10 years later when they're not suffering from migraine, how do they even know whether they suffer or not? It becomes this kind of idea that, well, it's always there, even though I've not had it for 10 years. So I think that one of the things that's really powerful is when you get to a certain age, you have a full assessment where somebody isn't just looking at your previous experiences and instead meeting you fresh. And arguably, it may be that those classifications are considered appropriate. It might be that they're not. And so that would be one great thing about going and seeing this person. Before you can deal with them, displace them, move through them, you need to know that you're actually facing them. And a fresh set of eyes and a multidisciplinary approach to your health and wellness, that may give you some new information that would be pretty impressive to know and to learn and to grow with. So that's one thing that I'd say. Secondly, if only I could tell you how to move through all of those classifications, I would be Dr. Phil. I'm joking. I wouldn't be Dr. Phil because he can't do that either. But I would be a billionaire, wouldn't I? I wouldn't though, because I'd have given it all away and we'd have a little community somewhere really hot and there'd be lots of fresh food and there'd be lots of happy children playing and there'd be lots of people with free choice and it would still be a democracy. One of those, remember that? So 2019 now, aren't the democracies? But when it comes down to those classifications, I can't tell you how to move through them, but what I can tell you is you will never get anything better than the old foundations of what makes us happy. So I say happy. I'm probably better to use the word content. Happiness is a byproduct of what you're doing. It's fleeting sometimes, but contentment can be manifested and you can continue down that path. And I suppose that I would say, like, what are you doing in your world that applies to what we know about what makes human beings content? And that means, have you got an amazing network of support? Have you got that in your life? Do you feel valued, wanted, and connected to your friends and family? Do they make you feel safe? If not, that needs to be created and connected. You need to find a way of a bigger social network, a better social network. It might be a smaller one as far as the numbers, but it will be a more content one where you feel that you are raised up. Secondly, what kind of exercise are you doing? I'm not talking about super freaky exercise because of anorexia, for example. That's bad exercise. That's not health exercise. That's bad exercise. So, you know, when you've got an eating disorder, you always have to balance what you're eating with what you're doing. But if we can start getting you to go outside and walk, if we can start getting you to really think about nutritious meals to put in your body, if we can start helping to realise that when you've got something like EUPD or BPD, this is often highly trauma related. So you not causing it, you're not a bad person for being BPD or having EUPD, not at all. You're a reactionary human being. You've had trauma. You've never been able to regulate your emotions because as a child it was screwed up. And the consequence is that you have these extremes when you come to deal with fear or relationships when you don't want them to leave you. Well, these are all very realistic feelings to experience. It's just you haven't had the regulation. So again, that comes down to, okay, let's look at the kind of relationships that I have in my life. Like, which ones make me feel safe? Do any of them make me feel safe? And if there are some that make you feel safe, or equally some that make you feel unsafe, there's a lot of information that you could take from that. So the safe ones I want to analyse. Well, why is it that with this person I don't seem to have any of those reactionary issues? Why is it with this person I feel really triggered? There's a lot of information that we can actually take from that, whether you sit down and analyse it by writing it down, or whether you just think about that clearly. So I would look at exploring that as well. And the most important thing is to just believe this. Everyone in the world goes through seasons with who they are, all of us. You know, up until 2.5 years ago, I thought I knew myself. I thought that I had a really good understanding of my adjustment. And then my dad killed himself, and I realised that I know FA about me. I don't know. I didn't know half of the things that I thought I knew. And I didn't know how I reacted to trauma in the way that I have done. You know, there are all these things, and like everybody feels that, good and bad. You go through transitions and reinventions of life, right? And in 2 years, 2.5 years, like my whole psyche has changed, my whole self has changed. I don't recognise myself. Sometimes I don't even recognise myself physically. I almost feel like I've physically changed, you know, trauma does that kind of stuff. But that's only 2.5 years. That means in 2.5 years' time, I could be a completely different person again, and so on and so forth. So don't get freaked out about time. That's bullshit. It's the biggest bullshit there is. And people tell it you all the time. It's like they say it to kids. Oh, if you don't pass your GCSEs, you've ruined your life. Like what? If you don't get your A-levels, you've ruined your life. If you don't go and get that job, you've ruined your life. If you don't buy that house or have this relationship, it's all bollocks. It's not true. You've got time. And there is nothing more pertinent, important and useful than spending time on your mental and physical wellness. And if that takes a year, 2 years, 5 years, it really doesn't matter, because you've got the rest of your life to live well. You've got the rest of your life to live in a position where you feel happier, healthier, more motivated. You can pick up your masters. You might want to do a totally different thing when you come back from that. There are always opportunities to redeem yourself time-wise from what you think you've lost. And I think that a lot of us get caught on that, I say, blueprint theory, where you're literally born and you come out of the womb and people are like, this is your pension plan. You should totally start paying in to a funeral plan as well. It's this really weird future-focused feeling that we have for our society. It's absolute lies, usually lies that also incorporate a heavy price tag as well. Everything's been commercialized, even death. So the reality of that is that you kind of feel that you leave the womb and then you're just running till death because you're told that's what you're meant to do. And it's not. The one thing that we know about our society is, as we have to some degree become more and more modern, more and more liberal even, and you know, I've always considered myself very liberal until recently, whereas now apparently people with my views are not considered liberal anymore. I've no idea why. I used to think a bit of freedom, democracy, bodily autonomy and the opportunity to have conversations with each other even when we disagree was a good thing, but apparently that's so 2019 as well. But realistically, if we think about what we should be telling young people and people of all ages is, you know, life doesn't have to be this journey of decisions that others made for us. So society's become more and more unhappy. You know, in the last 50 years, we are not happier. We have more than we've ever had before. You know, think about poor people in the UK. Once that would have meant them starving to death. Now it tends to mean that people may be overweight at times. So we have luxury as far as being able to eat, for example. That's not a criticism, by the way. I'm saying that it's actually a thing that should, to some degree, have shown us that we have more than we've ever had. But in spite of having more than we've ever had, we have less when it comes down to well-being. We have less when it comes down to a lot of senses of contentment. We have less in so many different ways. So if that's the case, then we have to arguably start looking at what's happening within the decisions that are being made around what we think we're meant to be doing versus the reality of the impact of those actions. And I think that when we start doing that and going, oh, well, maybe it's because I've been believing that you're meant to do A, B, C, D, and I'm more of an E, F, G, H person. That's, I think, when life starts to get more exciting. And a lot of us, we fundamentally affect our mental health by putting ourselves in boxes that we don't fit. I don't fit those boxes. I don't want to be in them. I even want a box. I want a triangle. And I want a flashing, pretty light triangle as well. I don't even want a normal box. I want a great big flashing, fairy lit triangle. And I don't want it to have a door on it. I just want it to be open. I want to be staring at the stars. That's the kind of triangle that I want. You know, why can't I have that? And like, that's mental health and physical health. When you're trying to fit boxes, or when you believe that you can give your power away a lot of the time to what people tell you, such as, you are this, you are that, you need this, you need that, take this, take that. Like, well, maybe we need to step back and say, okay, well, that's one option. And I think that the more that we start exploring things from that angle, instead of giving our power away to a belief system about what others created for us, or even a belief system about what they think is right for us, and asking ourselves, well, when I think about that, do I feel informed that this is the right thing for me? Then maybe we will feel happier. And that's why a convoluted conversation there about that particular case where somebody's saying about classifications and going away in mental health, because all of those things can be really, really good, but every single part of it comes down to, but what part do I play? What's my autonomous role within this? What do I wish to achieve from this? What do I need to get from this? You are the person who is basically, albeit funded for you, is still being paid for. You are a consumer. They need to do things for you that work for you, that they sell you to some degree, that is going to effectively help you. You are able to be demanding in those situations too. So I kind of really work on what you want to change, what you want to learn, how you want to develop, and then just nail it. That's what I'd say. Right, guys, I'm going to get going because I'm doing a radio interview very, very shortly. So I have to go, but I will see you again next week. If you're joining me on Wednesday for Kenny's Crime Cult, Kenny's Crime Cult. Thanks, trolls. Gave me that name, and I'm rolling with it. So Kenny's Crime Cult, Wednesday, great case, as ever. And also, just to note, Colin Pitchfork, child killer, did say, didn't I? Didn't think it was going to be long before he got taken back to prison. And he's been taken back to prison. Apparently he was chatting to younger girls. Great. Child killer on the streets. And he just starts chatting to young girls. How surprising. Great to know that they decided he was okay to get out. But what could possibly have gone wrong? Multiple child murderer being allowed out. I don't know. Anyway, join me then. Take care, chaps.